The massive trade station hung in the darkness of space like a giant metal wheel, spinning slowly above a neutral planet where nobody was supposed to fight. Inside its curved corridors, thousands of creatures from hundreds of different worlds bought and sold everything you could imagine. The air smelled like a mix of exotic spices, engine oil, and things that human noses couldn't quite identify. Down in the lower docks, where the cheaper ships parked and the lighting wasn't quite as bright, something terrible was happening. A small creature huddled against a cold metal wall, trying to make itself as tiny as possible. It was a dragon hatchling, though calling it a dragon seemed almost funny because it was barely bigger than a house cat. Its scales were soft and pale blue, not yet hardened into the armor that adult dragons wore. Its wings were small and delicate, folded tight against its trembling body. The little dragon had gotten separated from its guardian during a supply run. One moment it had been following the massive shape of its protector through the crowded station, and the next, a surge of travelers had swept between them. Now it was lost, scared, and surrounded by the worst kind of trouble. 5 Crithian soldiers stood around the hatchling in a loose circle, their reptilian faces twisted with cruel amusement. Crithians looked like someone had taken a crocodile, made it walk on 2 legs, and given it a mean streak a mile wide. They wore dark armor covered in scratches and dents from real combat, and their weapons hung casually from their belts. These weren't the kind of soldiers who protected people. These were the kind who made people need protection. The biggest one, with a nasty scar running down the side of his face, reached down and flicked the hatchling's wing hard enough to make it cry out. The sound was high-pitched and heartbreaking, like wind chimes breaking. The soldiers laughed, a harsh hissing sound that made people walking past speed up and look away. One of the other Crithians snatched a small pouch from around the hatchling's neck. Credits scattered across the floor, spinning and clinking. The little dragon reached for them with a trembling claw, but the soldier kicked the coins away, sending them skittering under cargo containers. A crowd had formed at a safe distance, but nobody moved to help. A family of blue-skinned Valerians hurried their children past with their eyes fixed straight ahead. A merchant with 4 arms pretended to be very interested in his datapad. Even the station security guards, visible in their gray uniforms about 30 feet away, just stood there watching with blank expressions. That's how things worked in the galaxy. The Crithian Empire controlled dozens of star systems and had one of the largest military fleets in known space. Dragon hatchlings, on the other hand, belonged to a dying race that barely numbered in the dozens anymore. Once upon a time, dragons had been powerful and respected, but centuries of being hunted for their valuable scales and organs had nearly wiped them out. Nobody wanted to risk making enemies of the Crithians for a creature that couldn't offer anything in return. The hatchling started crying for real now, tears rolling down its small snout and dripping onto the metal floor. Where they landed, the tears crystallized into tiny diamonds, another reason dragons had been hunted almost to extinction. The lead soldier bent down and picked up one of the crystal tears, holding it up to the light and grinning. That's when the crowd parted and someone pushed through. He was human, which was still unusual enough in this part of the galaxy to make people turn and look. More than that, he was just a kid, maybe 14 years old, wearing a worn jacket with a merchant ship's patch on the shoulder. His name was Jake Martinez, though nobody there knew it yet. Jake wasn't particularly tall or strong-looking. He had the kind of average build that wouldn't stand out in any crowd back on Earth. His dark hair stuck up in odd directions like he'd just woken up from a nap, and his shoes were scuffed from walking the metal corridors of a dozen different stations. But there was something in his eyes, a kind of stubborn determination that his father said came from his grandmother, who'd been the toughest person in their entire neighborhood. Without saying a word, Jake walked right up to the circle of soldiers and stepped between them and the hatchling. He wasn't stupid enough to think he could fight them, but he also couldn't just walk past like everyone else. His heart hammered in his chest so hard he could hear it in his ears, but he planted his feet and crossed his arms. The Crithian soldiers stopped laughing and stared at him like he'd just grown a second head. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. The lead Crithian soldier, the one with the scar, straightened up to his full height. Standing, he was easily 7 feet tall, all muscle and scales and bad intentions. His yellow eyes narrowed as he looked down at Jake like someone might look at an annoying insect that had just landed on their dinner plate. "Human child," the soldier said in Galactic Common, his voice a low rumble that came from deep in his chest. "This is not your concern. Move along before you get hurt." Jake's mouth felt dry as sandpaper, and his hands were shaking so badly he had to clench them into fists to hide it. He'd only been traveling with his dad's merchant crew for about 6 months, and most of that time had been pretty boring. Loading cargo, unloading cargo, sitting through endless customs inspections. Nothing had prepared him for standing face to face with armed soldiers who looked like they ate kids for breakfast. But behind him, he could hear the little dragon's ragged breathing, could feel it pressing against the back of his legs for protection. Jake had a younger sister back home on Earth, only 7 years old, and he thought about how scared she got during thunderstorms. This hatchling sounded just as terrified. "No," Jake said, and his voice cracked a little on the word, which made his face burn with embarrassment. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Where I come from, we don't just stand around and watch people pick on someone smaller than them. That makes you a coward, not a soldier." The crowd around them gasped. Several aliens actually took steps backward, like they were afraid whatever stupid Jake had just caught might be contagious. In the galactic community, you didn't insult warriors to their faces. You especially didn't insult Crithian warriors, who were famous for their pride and their extremely short tempers. The scarred soldier's face twisted into something between rage and disbelief. His hand moved toward the weapon on his belt, but then he seemed to decide that would be too quick. Too easy. Instead, he pulled his arm back and swung his fist in a backhanded strike that caught Jake across the face. Pain exploded through Jake's head like fireworks. The world spun sideways and suddenly he was looking up at the ceiling, flat on his back on the cold metal floor. His mouth tasted like copper, and when he touched his lips, his fingers came away red. Blood dripped from his split lip onto the deck plating. The station security guards shifted their weight but didn't move forward. Technically, the Crithian soldier could claim self-defense against verbal assault. Technically, a human kid had no business interfering with Crithian military personnel. Technically, Jake had brought this on himself. But technically didn't make it right. Jake's ears were ringing and his vision was blurry, but through the haze he could see the hatchling watching him with huge, terrified eyes. The little dragon had stopped crying and was making a different sound now, a low humming that seemed to vibrate in Jake's chest even though he was several feet away. His dad was going to kill him. If Jake survived this, which wasn't looking likely, his father would ground him until he was 30. But as Jake pushed himself up onto his hands and knees, tasting blood and feeling like he might throw up, he realized he didn't care. Some things were more important than staying safe. Some things were worth getting hit for. Jake staggered to his feet, swaying a little. His vision cleared enough to see the shocked expressions on every face in the crowd. The Crithian soldiers had stopped grinning. They were staring at him like he was some kind of alien creature they'd never encountered before. "I said no," Jake repeated, and this time his voice didn't crack. He wiped the blood from his chin with the back of his hand and stepped back between the soldiers and the hatchling. His legs felt like rubber, and he was pretty sure if anyone touched him he'd fall over, but he stayed standing. Behind him, the hatchling's humming grew louder. The sound was strange and beautiful, like wind chimes mixed with a cat's purr. None of the aliens in the crowd seemed to recognize it, but they were all staring now, their various eyes wide with something that looked like wonder or maybe fear. The scarred Crithian took a step forward, his face darkening to an angry purple color. "You dare to stand against us again? You insignificant little creature? We are soldiers of the Crithian Empire. We have conquered worlds while your species was still crawling in the dirt." "Yeah?" Jake shot back, his fear starting to turn into anger. The pain in his face helped somehow, made everything sharper and clearer. "Well, we crawled out of the dirt and made it to the stars anyway. And we didn't need to pick on babies to feel tough about it." The other 4 soldiers moved to surround Jake, clearly done playing games. Their hands went to their weapons, actual energy blasters that could turn a human teenager into ash in about half a second. The crowd started backing away faster now, clearing a space like people did before a fight broke out. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. This was it. He was about to die on a space station millions of miles from Earth because he couldn't keep his mouth shut and walk away. His dad would never even know why, would just get a notification that his son had been killed in an incident with Crithian military personnel. The scarred soldier raised his blaster, pointing it directly at Jake's chest. The weapon hummed as it charged up, a high-pitched whine that seemed to fill the entire corridor. "Any last words, human?" the Crithian asked, his finger moving toward the trigger. Jake opened his mouth, though he had no idea what he was going to say. Sorry didn't seem like enough. Neither did any curse word he could think of. But before he could get any words out, every light in the corridor flickered. The station's metal floor shuddered beneath everyone's feet, a vibration that grew stronger with each passing second. An alarm started blaring somewhere in the distance, the kind that meant something very bad was happening. Then a sound rolled through the station like thunder, deep and primal and older than starships. It was a roar that made every person and creature in the corridor freeze in place, their survival instincts screaming that something dangerous, something ancient and powerful, had just arrived. The hatchling behind Jake stopped humming and started making happy chirping sounds instead, bouncing on its small feet. Its guardian had come. The adult dragon's eyes scanned the corridor, and when they landed on the Crithian soldiers, something happened that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. The dragon's lips pulled back, revealing teeth the size of daggers, and it released another roar directly at them. The force of it was like a physical blow. The soldiers were thrown backward, crashing into walls and sliding across the floor. Their weapons skittered away, useless. The scarred leader tried to get up, scrambling on the slick metal floor, but he didn't make it far. The dragon moved with shocking speed for something so large, its massive body flowing forward like water. One enormous clawed foot came down on the Crithian's chest, pinning him to the ground. The soldier struggled and gasped, his armor creaking under the pressure, but he might as well have been trying to lift a building. The other 4 Crithian soldiers didn't even try to fight. They pressed themselves against the walls, their weapons forgotten, their earlier arrogance completely gone. One of them was actually whimpering, a sound Jake didn't think creatures like them could make. The dragon leaned down, bringing its massive head close to the trapped soldier. When it spoke, its voice was deep and ancient, carrying the weight of centuries. Every translator in the corridor picked it up and converted it to different languages simultaneously. "You dare to harm my hatchling?" The scarred Crithian tried to answer, but all that came out was a strangled wheeze. The dragon's claw pressed down just a little harder, and armor plating cracked with a sound like breaking glass. Then something changed in the dragon's expression. Its eyes, burning with rage just seconds ago, shifted toward Jake and the hatchling. The fury seemed to pause, replaced by something else. Confusion maybe, or surprise. The dragon's huge head turned fully toward them, and Jake suddenly found himself looking directly into eyes that were bigger than his entire head. They were the color of molten gold, swirling with intelligence and power and something that might have been curiosity. For a long moment, the dragon just stared at him. Jake realized he was still standing in front of the hatchling, his arms spread slightly like he could somehow protect it from its own guardian. Blood still dripped from his split lip, and he probably looked like he'd been hit by a truck, which wasn't far from the truth. But he hadn't moved from his spot. The hatchling, meanwhile, had started making excited chirping sounds and was trying to push past Jake's legs to get to the adult dragon. Its small tail wagged like a puppy's, and it was bouncing up and down with joy. The difference between its happiness now and its terror just minutes ago couldn't have been more obvious. The adult dragon released the Crithian soldier, though it kept one claw resting on his chest as a warning not to move. Then it began moving toward Jake and the hatchling, each step deliberate and careful, like it was afraid of startling them. Jake's survival instincts finally kicked in, screaming at him to run, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Maybe it was fear freezing him in place, or maybe it was something else. The hatchling's humming had started again, that strange vibrating sound, and Jake could feel it resonating in his chest like a second heartbeat. The dragon lowered its massive head until it was just inches from Jake's face. Its breath was hot and smelled like metal and ozone, like lightning striking stone. Up close, Jake could see that its scales weren't just one color but thousands of shades shifting and changing, each one catching the light differently. "You protected my child," the dragon said, and its voice was softer now, gentler, though still powerful enough to make Jake's teeth vibrate. A human child stood against armed warriors to protect a dragon hatchling. I did not think such courage existed in the younger races anymore. Jake's mouth opened and closed a few times before any words came out. They were hurting it. Someone had to do something. The dragon's eyes seemed to look right through him, seeing everything he was, everything he'd ever been, everything he might become. Then those golden eyes shifted to the hatchling, which had finally squeezed past Jake's legs and was now climbing up the adult dragon's foreleg, chirping and humming happily. The dragon's expression changed again, and this time what Jake saw there looked almost like shock. The adult dragon gently lifted the hatchling with one massive claw, bringing it up to eye level. The little dragon nuzzled against its guardian's scaled snout, still making those happy chirping sounds. But beneath the chirps, that strange humming continued, growing stronger and more rhythmic, like a heartbeat or a song that had no words. The dragon turned its attention back to Jake, and for the first time since it had burst through the airlock, it looked uncertain. Not afraid exactly, but like it had just discovered something completely unexpected and didn't quite know what to do about it. "What is your name, human child?" the dragon asked. "Jake," he managed to say, his voice coming out smaller than he'd intended. "Jake Martinez." "I am called Valithrin," the dragon replied, inclining its head slightly in what might have been a bow. "And this is Sirith, my ward and the last hatchling born to our kind in nearly 30 years. The little dragon, Sirith, squirmed in Velithrin's grasp and reached out toward Jake with its small claws, still humming that increasingly familiar sound. Velithrin's golden eyes widened further, and Jake could have sworn the dragon actually looked worried now. How long has he been making that sound? Velithrin asked, his voice urgent. Jake thought back, trying to remember through the chaos and fear. Since right after I stood in front of him the first time. Maybe a few minutes before you got here? Velithrin closed his eyes and made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a growl. When he opened them again, he looked at Jake with an expression that was impossible to read. Jake Martinez, do you know what a soul bond is? Jake shook his head. He'd only been traveling in space for 6 months, and most of what he knew about alien cultures came from his dad's warnings about what not to do or say to different species. Nobody had mentioned anything about soul bonds. By now, more people had gathered at a safe distance. Station security had been reinforced by what looked like the station master's personal guards, though none of them seemed eager to get any closer to an angry dragon. Jake could also see his father pushing through the crowd, his face pale with panic. Robert Martinez had been checking inventory in their ship when the alarm started, and finding his son standing next to a dragon probably wasn't what he'd expected. Velithrin's voice rose so that everyone in the corridor could hear. Long ago, before most of the current civilizations had discovered fire, my kind flew between the stars. We were not the strongest species, nor the smartest, but we had something rare. We could form bonds with other beings, connections that went deeper than friendship or loyalty. Soul bonds. The crowd murmured. Even species that had never heard of dragons seemed to understand that something important was being discussed. These bonds could only form under specific conditions, Velithrin continued. The dragon must be young, their heart still open and trusting. And the other being must possess extraordinary courage combined with a completely selfless nature. No thought of reward, no consideration of personal safety, only the pure desire to protect someone weaker than themselves. Velithrin looked down at Sirith, who was straining toward Jake so hard that the adult dragon had to adjust his grip to keep the hatchling from falling. Such bonds made legends across 1,000 worlds. A dragon and their bonded partner shared thoughts, emotions, strength. As the dragon grew, so did the connection. Eventually, they could share everything, even fire and flight. Together, they were unstoppable, protectors of the innocent and champions of justice. Jake's dad had finally made it to the front of the crowd. Jake, get away from there right now, he shouted, but Velithrin raised one wing, a gesture that clearly meant stay back. But as my kind dwindled, Velithrin's voice grew sadder, hunted for our scales and our tears, for the fire in our hearts and the magic in our blood, we retreated from the galaxy. We hid ourselves away, protected our few remaining young. And we thought, truly thought, that the age of soul bonds had passed. That no worthy souls existed among the younger races, that courage and selflessness had been bred out in favor of survival and self-interest. The dragon's gaze fixed on Jake again, intense and unwavering. I was wrong. My ward, Sirith, has initiated a soul bond with you, Jake Martinez. The first such bond in over 300 years. The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Jake heard his father make a strangled sound. Somewhere in the crowd, someone dropped something that shattered on the floor. The Crithian soldiers, still pinned against the walls, looked at Jake with expressions of shock and something that might have been fear. Wait, Jake said, his mind racing to catch up with what he was hearing. What does that mean? Initiated. It means, Velithrin said slowly, carefully, that Sirith's life force has begun intertwining with yours. Your heartbeats are already synchronizing. Your emotions are starting to echo in his mind, and his in yours. Have you felt anything unusual? A humming in your chest? A warmth that isn't quite physical? Jake thought about it and realized with a start that yes, he had been feeling something. A vibration that seemed to come from inside him, matching the hatchling's humming. And there was a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the pain from being hit. Once a soul bond begins, Velithrin continued, and now his voice was heavy with something that sounded like regret, it cannot be stopped. It can only be completed or severed. Completion means a lifetime of partnership, of training, of responsibilities that most beings could never imagine. Severing means death. Death? Jake's father pushed forward despite Velithrin's warning. What do you mean death? Velithrin turned his massive head to address Jake's father directly. If the bond is rejected, if Jake refuses to accept it, the separation will kill Sirith. His life force has already begun depending on the connection. He is too young to survive its loss. Robert Martinez looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. He grabbed his son's shoulder. "Jake, you can't. You're just a kid. You can't be responsible for—" "But there is more," Velithrin interrupted. "Jake Martinez must also understand the full truth. If he accepts the bond, his life as he knows it ends. He cannot return to simple merchant runs with his father. He must come with me to the last sanctuary of the Draka, to places hidden from the galaxy for centuries. He must train in the ancient ways, learn to fight, to think, to be worthy of the partnership Sirith has offered him. This training will take years, perhaps decades." Jake looked at the little dragon, at Sirith, who was watching him with huge, hopeful eyes. The hatchling had stopped humming and was completely still, as if it understood that its entire future was balanced on whatever Jake said next. "And if I don't accept?" Jake asked quietly. "If I say no, Sirith dies?" Velithrin nodded slowly, his golden eyes sad. "Yes. The bond has gone too far to turn back. My ward chose you, Jake Martinez, and that choice has consequences." The corridor was completely silent now. Even the station alarms had stopped blaring. Everyone was waiting for a 14-year-old human kid to make a decision that would change everything. Jake looked at his father, and Robert Martinez looked back at his son with eyes that were suddenly wet. They'd been traveling together for 6 months, and those had been some of the best months of Jake's life. After his parents' divorce, after his mom had taken his little sister back to Earth, Jake had felt lost. Coming with his dad on merchant runs had been an escape, an adventure, a chance to see the galaxy and forget about the mess back home. Now he was being asked to give all of that up. For a creature he'd just met. For a hatchling that had been crying in a corridor while everyone else walked past. "How long do I have to decide?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer before Velithrin spoke it. "Minutes, perhaps. An hour at most. The bond grows stronger with each moment. If it continues much longer without acceptance, Sirith's body will begin to fail. He will think he has been rejected, and his heart will break before his body follows." Jake's father squeezed his shoulder harder. "Son, you don't have to do this. This isn't fair. You didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did he," Jake said softly, nodding toward Sirith. The little dragon's eyes were starting to dim, the brightness fading as if someone was slowly turning down a light inside him. The hatchling was trembling again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something worse. Jake thought about his sister, about how she'd cry when she was scared and how he'd sit with her until she fell asleep. He thought about all the times he'd stood up to bullies at school, even when it got him in trouble, even when it meant he'd go home with bruises. His grandmother used to say he had a hero's heart in a normal kid's body, and that would either make him great or get him killed. Maybe it would do both. "Dad," Jake said, and his voice was steadier than he felt. "What would Grandma say if she was here?" Robert Martinez let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "She'd say you were the bravest kid she ever knew. And the most stubborn." He pulled Jake into a fierce hug. "She'd also say I raised you right, even if she wished I hadn't." They stayed like that for a moment, father and son, while hundreds of aliens watched and a dragon waited and a hatchling's life hung in the balance. When they pulled apart, Robert's face was set with determination, even though tears were running down his cheeks. "You do what you have to do," he said. "I'll be here. I'll visit when I can. And when you're done training or whatever this is, you come find me. Deal?" Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. Then he turned to Velithrin. "I accept," he said, and the words came out stronger than he expected. "I accept the soul bond with Sirith. I'll train with you. I'll learn whatever I need to learn. Just tell me what to do." The change in Sirith was immediate and dramatic. The little dragon's eyes blazed back to full brightness, brighter than before. The humming sound became almost musical, joyful, and the hatchling leaped from Velithrin's claw straight toward Jake. On instinct, Jake caught him, and the moment his hands touched the dragon's scales, he felt it. A rush of warmth flooded through his entire body, starting from his chest and spreading out to his fingertips and toes. It was like diving into warm water, or standing in sunshine after being cold for hours, or coming home after a long trip. The humming he'd felt in his chest synchronized perfectly with Sirith's, and suddenly Jake could feel things that weren't his own feelings. Joy, relief, gratitude, and something else. A sense of rightness, of two pieces fitting together that were always meant to be joined. Sirith climbed up Jake's chest and perched on his shoulder, wrapping his small tail around Jake's neck like a scaly scarf. The hatchling rubbed his head against Jake's cheek, making happy chirping sounds that made Jake laugh despite everything. Velithrin lowered his massive head and touched his snout gently to Jake's forehead. "The bond is sealed," he said, and his voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Welcome to the ancient partnership, Jake Martinez. You are now the first human dragon-bonded warrior in the history of your species." The crowd erupted in chaos. People were shouting, taking pictures, sending messages. The station master appeared with a full security detail and a team of diplomats, all of them talking at once about protocols and procedures and galactic law. Representatives from the human diplomatic corps arrived within minutes, looking completely panicked because nobody had any idea how to handle this situation. But the biggest commotion came from the corner where the Krithian soldiers had been cowering. Velithrin turned his attention back to them, and his earlier fury returned in full force. The scarred leader tried to crawl away, but the dragon's tail blocked his path. "You harmed a hatchling under bond protection," Velithrin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You threatened my ward's chosen partner. These are crimes that invoke the ancient laws that supersede even the Galactic Council's authority." Station security moved forward, but Velithrin stopped them with a look. "These criminals are mine to judge. I will deliver them personally to the Krithian High Command, where they will face punishment under the old treaties. Any who interfere will answer to what remains of the Dragon Lords." Nobody interfered. The Krithian Empire might be powerful, but even they remembered the old stories, the old warnings about what happened when you made enemies of dragons. The soldiers were taken away in energy restraints, the scarred leader still trying to protest that he had only been following standard procedure. The next few hours were a blur for Jake. Medical personnel insisted on treating his split lip, even though it was already starting to heal faster than it should have, something about the bond accelerating his body's natural processes. Diplomats asked him 1,000 questions he couldn't answer. His father packed a bag of his belongings with shaking hands, neither of them quite believing this was really happening. Through it all, Sirith stayed perched on Jake's shoulder, a constant warm presence that kept him grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. Finally, as the station's artificial day cycle shifted toward evening, Velithrin led Jake to a small, sleek ship that looked like it had been grown rather than built, all smooth curves and scales that shimmered in the docking lights. "This will take us to the sanctuary," Velithrin explained. "To the last refuge of my kind, where the 7 remaining adult dragons wait. They will not believe what has happened here today. A human, of all species, forming a true bond." Jake paused at the ship's entrance and looked back. His father stood at the edge of the docking bay, one hand raised in farewell. The crowd of onlookers was still there, smaller now but still watching. And beyond them, through the massive viewports, Jake could see Earth's sun in the distance, just another star among billions. "Will I ever go back?" Jake asked. "Eventually," Velithrin said. "When your training is complete, when you and Sirith have grown into your full partnership, you will return. The galaxy will need you then. There are many who prey on the weak, many who believe strength gives them the right to harm others. The dragon bonded exist to stand against such cruelty." Jake took a deep breath and stepped into the ship. Sirith chirped happily and stretched his small wings. As the door closed behind them and the ship lifted off, Jake felt that strange humming in his chest grow stronger, more certain. He'd come to the station that morning as just another merchant's kid, bored and trying to find his place in the universe. He was leaving as something else entirely. A dragon-bonded warrior. A protector. A legend in the making. Years would pass in training. Jake would grow from a boy into a young man, and Sirith would grow from a hatchling into a magnificent dragon whose scales shimmered like starlight. The bond between them would deepen until they could share thoughts without words, until Jake could feel the wind beneath Sirith's wings as if they were his own. Word of what happened on Station Meridian spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Other humans heard the story and began seeking out the remaining dragons, hoping to prove themselves worthy of bonds. Most failed. Courage alone wasn't enough. The dragons tested not just bravery but the selfless heart, the willingness to stand between the strong and the helpless regardless of the cost. But a few succeeded. A handful of humans across the galaxy heard the call and answered it, forming bonds that gave the ancient dragons hope for the first time in centuries. Humanity, the newest and most reckless species to reach the stars, had the one quality the dragons valued most: they couldn't walk past someone in trouble without trying to help. 5 years after that day on the station, Jake and Sirith returned to the galactic stage. They stood before the council as representatives of a new alliance between humanity and the Draka. Sirith was now large enough to carry Jake on his back, his scales a brilliant blue-silver that caught light like water. Together they were formidable, a sight that made even the Krithian ambassadors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jake spoke to the council about protection, about justice, about the responsibility of the strong to defend the weak. And when he finished, Sirith spread his wings wide, and the assembled representatives understood that the Age of Dragons had not ended. It had simply been waiting for the right partners to return.